What if I told you some of the most powerful cities in history did not fall to war, fire, or empires, but to frogs, rabbits, insects, and venom? Across the ancient world, nature created deadly no-go zones where human life simply collapsed. These are true historical disasters where armies failed, walls meant nothing, and survival meant fleeing. From cities drowned in insects to islands eaten alive by mice, these stories sound unreal, but they are recorded by ancient historians themselves. Stay with me, because what reclaimed these places was not conquest, but nature unleashed. At number 1, entering the story of the amphibian apocalypse, we find one of the most shocking historical no-go zones ever recorded, created not by war, but by nature itself. In the 4th century before the Common Era, the Autariatae were among the most powerful Illyrian tribal confederations in the Balkans, described by the Greek geographer Strabo in his work Geographica as one of the 3 strongest Illyrian peoples alongside the Ardii and the Dardani. Their territory stretched across the valleys of the Lim and Tara rivers, extended inland from Lake Skodra, and bordered the lands of the Tribali and Dardani, placing them at the heart of Balkan geopolitics. These were hardened warriors who had expanded their power at the expense of rival tribes, and had even concerned Macedonian commanders like Lysimachus and Cassander during the Wars of the Diadochi, the chaotic struggles following the death of Alexander the Great. Yet around 310 to 300 before the Common Era, just before the Great Celtic invasion of the Balkans, an ecological catastrophe struck that no army could stop. Ancient historians such as Diodorus Siculus, Agatharchides, and Appian describe bizarre meteorological events in which frogs were said to be generated in the clouds, an ancient way of describing torrential rains that triggered explosive amphibian breeding. The resulting population boom, likely involving the common frog Rana temperaria or a similar species, overwhelmed the environment completely. Frogs invaded homes, cooking vessels, bedding, and food supplies, but the true disaster began when millions of them died as conditions changed. Their decomposing bodies poisoned the soil and water, creating a toxic miasma so foul that the air itself became unbreathable. Appian framed the event as the vengeance of Apollo, but in practical terms, the Autariatae homeland became an uninhabitable no-go zone. Unable to drink the water or remain on their land, tens of thousands fled their ancestral valleys. Historical records state that approximately 20,000 families migrated south and were resettled by King Cassander of Macedon in the Parobelian Mountains, ending the Autariatae as an independent regional superpower and leaving behind a poisoned landscape reclaimed entirely by nature. Coming in at number 2, the fall of Myus reveals how slow environmental change can silently transform a thriving city into a forbidden zone ruled by insects. Myus was once a proud Ionian Greek city, a full member of the prestigious Ionian League, located on the western coast of Anatolia near the mouth of the Meander River in modern Turkey. In the 5th century before the Common Era, its wealth was so significant that the Persian king Artaxerxes I assigned its revenues to the exiled Athenian general Themistocles to supply his table with meat and fish, a clear sign of Myus's rich harbor and fishing economy. The city boasted monumental architecture, including a white marble temple dedicated to Dionysus, later noted by the traveler Pausanias as the last major structure still standing in the 2nd century of the Common Era. Ironically, the very river that once supported Myus became the agent of its destruction. The Meander River, famous for its heavy sediment load and winding course, deposited vast amounts of silt into the Latmian Gulf over centuries. Pausanias describes how a former sea inlet was blocked by mud, turning the harbor into a lake and cutting the city off from the Aegean Sea. As salt water gave way to stagnant freshwater marshes, the environment became a perfect breeding ground for insects. Ancient sources describe swarms of polyps, likely mosquitoes or biting midges, breeding in such vast numbers that daily life became impossible. These clouds of gnats were not merely irritating, they physically forced the population to abandon the city, possibly aided by the spread of diseases such as malaria. Eventually, the citizens of Myus negotiated a political union with nearby Miletus, carrying their possessions and the statues of their gods in a solemn departure. What remained was a ghost city rising from insect-choked wetlands, a textbook example of how nature can slowly convert a human settlement into an ecological no-go zone. Landing at number 3, the Balearic Rabbit Wars demonstrate how an invasive species can overwhelm even the toughest societies and force imperial intervention. The Balearic Islands, known in antiquity as the Gymnasiae and including modern Majorca and Minorca, were famous for their elite slingers, feared mercenaries in the armies of Carthage and later Rome. These were resilient, battle-hardened communities, yet during the reign of Emperor Augustus, from 27 before the Common Era to 14 of the Common Era, they faced an enemy immune to slings and spears. According to Strabo and Pliny the Elder, the inhabitants were driven to desperation by an explosion of European rabbits, scientifically known as Oryctolagus cuniculus. Although native to the Iberian Peninsula, where the name Hispania may even derive from a Phoenician term meaning land of rabbits, these animals were invasive in the Balearics. With no natural predators such as foxes or wolves, their population grew uncontrollably. The rabbits burrowed beneath houses, collapsing foundations, stripped bark from trees, and devoured grain fields, triggering famine. Ancient texts describe this as a great warfare against the animals, as they were driven from one field only to reappear in another. Conditions deteriorated so badly that the islanders sent a formal embassy to Rome, begging Augustus either for military assistance or for new land altogether. Instead of legions, Augustus dispatched ferrets, known as vivarae, which were released into the rabbit warrens to flush the animals out. Humans then killed them with nets, dogs, and clubs in a coordinated eradication campaign. This Roman-sponsored biological intervention eventually restored balance, preventing the islands from becoming a permanent no-go zone and standing as one of the earliest recorded examples of invasive species management. Closing out at number 4, the story of Amyclae illustrates how fear itself can erase a city from the map when nature crosses a critical threshold. Amyclae, located on the Tyrrhenian coast of Italy in the Latium region between Terracina and Gaeta near modern Sperlonga, must not be confused with its Greek namesake in Laconia. This Italian Amyclae became infamous through the legend of Takatai Amyclae, or Silent Amyclae, which claimed the city was destroyed because citizens were forbidden from raising alarms after too many false warnings. However, natural historians such as Pliny the Elder and Silenus offer a more chilling explanation, stating that the city was Serpentibus dilatus, destroyed by snakes. The surrounding Pontine marshes were notoriously hostile environments, supporting dense populations of venomous vipers, likely species such as Vipera aspis or Vipera berus. A shift in ecological balance, possibly caused by mild winters or an increase in rodent prey, appears to have triggered a massive surge in snake numbers. Pliny records that the inhabitants were driven out as snakes infiltrated homes, foundations, and bedding in search of warmth. Unlike insects or famine, this was an immediate lethal threat, turning daily life into a constant gamble with death. The psychological terror of living where every shadow could hide a fatal bite dissolved the city's social fabric. Supporting this account is the enduring snake handling tradition seen in the nearby town of Coculo, where the Festa dei Serpari preserves a cultural memory of humanity's struggle to control serpents. Amyclae represents the moment that struggle failed, leaving behind a silent ruin, abandoned and reclaimed by nature, a stark historical no-go zone where civilization simply fled. Arriving at number 5, the centipede exodus of Rhoetium stands as one of the most unnerving historical no-go zones where human settlement collapsed under relentless biological pressure. Rhoetium was a Greek city in the Troad of northwestern Anatolia, positioned on the Babakal spur and honored in mythology as the resting place of Ajax, the great Telamonian hero of the Trojan War. Despite this heroic legacy, ancient authors such as Aelian in On the Nature of Animals and Pliny the Elder record that the city was abandoned for a far more ignoble reason: a mass invasion of scolopendra, or giant centipedes. These were not harmless household insects, but large Mediterranean predators, such as Scolopendra cingulata, capable of reaching up to 15 centimeters in length and armed with venomous forciples that inflicted intense pain, swelling, and fever. Ancient descriptions speak of a multitude of these creatures overwhelming the city, suggesting a mass eruption likely triggered by flooding or seismic activity, both common in the geologically unstable Troad. Forced out of the soil, the centipedes found ideal shelter in human architecture, where stone walls, wooden roofs, and narrow crevices mirrored their natural habitats. Their nocturnal behavior and tendency to seek contact with surfaces meant they crawled into bedding, clothing, and footwear. In a city without sealed doors or windows, there was no refuge. A place where sleep, almost guaranteed a venomous bite, became psychologically unbearable. Trade ceased, rest vanished, and panic spread. Ruidium did not fall to siege engines or invading armies, but to exhaustion, fear, and venom, transforming it into a biological no-go zone reclaimed by many-legged predators. Moving on at number 6, the abandoned Ethiopian settlements reveal how entire regions can be erased from human habitation when venom becomes unavoidable. Greek historians Diodorus Siculus and Strabo devoted significant attention to the peoples living south of Egypt, in regions corresponding to modern Sudan, Eritrea, and Ethiopia, grouping them by subsistence practices such as fish eaters and locust eaters. Among these accounts is a chilling description of a territory near the Acrodophagy that was completely deserted due to an overwhelming plague of arachnids. According to the sources, the land was abandoned because of countless scorpions and terrifying creatures known as tetragnophi, meaning four-jawed. This term likely refers to solifuges, also called camel spiders or wind scorpions, known for their massive jaws and aggressive appearance, or possibly large mygalomorph spiders. Diodorus emphasizes that their numbers caused a total desertion of the area, turning what had been tribal land into an uninhabitable wasteland. This was not an urban collapse, but a territorial one, where every rock, burrow, and crevice concealed venom. The acrodophagy themselves were described as short-lived, often dying from internal parasites such as winged lice, underscoring how hostile the environment already was to human survival. When the land became saturated with neurotoxic threats, its carrying capacity dropped to zero. Unlike lions or elephants, which could be hunted, scorpions and spiders could only be fled. The result was a permanent displacement and a vast historical no-go zone where nature asserted absolute dominance. Closing this segment at number 7, the legend of the iron-eating mice of Gyaros illustrates how even the smallest creatures can render a place unlivable. Gyaros is a barren, rocky island in the northern Cyclades of the Aegean Sea, later infamous in Roman times as a place of exile precisely because of its extreme inhospitability. Yet long before it became a penal island, Aristotle and Pliny the Elder recorded that earlier inhabitants had already abandoned it due to a natural calamity. Ancient sources claimed the mice of Gyaros were so numerous and ravenous that they gnawed through iron itself. While biologically impossible to digest metal, this dramatic exaggeration reflects a grim ecological reality. On a small, arid island with limited resources, a population explosion of mice would lead to hyperpredation, stripping the land of seeds, vegetation, and insects. Starving rodents gnaw relentlessly on hard materials to sharpen their teeth and in frantic searches for food, destroying wooden structures, storage containers, tools, and possibly weapons. Pliny notes that the sheer volume of mice forced the inhabitants to flee as agriculture became impossible. Seeds were eaten before sprouting, stored grain vanished, and even tools were rendered useless. Gyaros became a textbook Malthusian no-go zone, abandoned not because of violence or disease, but because nature's smallest consumers devoured the very foundations of human survival. These ancient no-go zones remind us that civilization has always lived at the mercy of biology, not just armies and empires. What the ancients called the wrath of the gods were often ecological tipping points that no wall, weapon, or army could resist. From insect-choked cities to landscapes surrendered to venom and swarms, nature proved it could revoke humanity's claim to the land at any moment. If these stories changed how you see history, comment your thoughts below. Like the video, subscribe for more deep historical content, and thanks for watching.